We're here today to talk about Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West by Cormac McCarthy, which is a terrifying and brilliant novel that I really hope you decide to read. I'll be discussing how to read the novel, what its influences are, and what you might expect to get out of it. And along the way, I'll be making a case for why you should read the novel as well, why it's important to prioritize over a lot of others. It is one of the best apocalyptic works in all of literature, and it deals with violence better than any other work I've ever read. Along the way here, we'll be drawing from The Bright Book of Life, chapter 46, which is about Blood Meridian. The three clearest influences on Cormac McCarthy's work, and this is especially true in Blood Meridian, are the works of Shakespeare, Herman Melville's writings, especially Moby Dick, and William Faulkner's works. If you hope to get the most out of Blood Meridian, you really should start by reading or rereading Moby Dick. Cormac McCarthy famously said that books are made out of books. That was his philosophy, and I can't argue with it. He knew far better than you or I how literature works. I'm far from understanding all of the many works that came before Blood Meridian that ultimately informed it and aided its construction. But Moby Dick most clearly was a huge influence, and the parallels, if you've read both novels, are pretty clear. At a high level, there in Moby Dick is a group of whalers who are on a ship called the Pequod. They're at sea for years, and they're hunting and killing whales, but ultimately they are in pursuit of the white whale, Moby Dick. And in Blood Meridian, there is a group of scalp hunters who are tasked with going out and killing Apaches. And as they begin to pursue murder and as they continue to kill, they descend further and further into complete chaos and let violence consume them. The way that violence is presented in Blood Meridian is very stylized, and there are layers to the aesthetic and the way that Cormac McCarthy is poetically distancing us from the violence, but still allowing it to consume the narrative and consume the page at times. That is extremely reminiscent of the ways that Ishmael in Moby Dick, the narrator of Moby Dick, is putting himself at sort of a poetic distance from what is being observed. There's a great distance, in other words, between the signifier and the signified, the person who is describing, or the narrative voice who is describing what is happening and what is actually happening. And that is where we get a lot of the richness, the sublime richness in the narrative. That's a lot of what makes Blood Meridian and Moby Dick so good, and why there's so much material for us to get into. So to start, you should definitely go into reading Blood Meridian knowing that it owes a debt, like all great novels, to the stories, the epic works that have come before it. I'll note here that the main reason why I keep getting drawn back to Cormac McCarthy's works is that you cannot convince me that there has ever been a more talented writer. He had plenty of people before him to draw from, so he benefited greatly from the likes of Homer and Shakespeare and Herman Melville, plenty of others, Faulkner. But ultimately, in my view, his sheer talent is just incomparable. I don't know that we'll ever have another writer as great as him. And here, of course, I'm only speaking about his abilities, not who he was as a person in his private life. I do not believe that we as readers should be looking to most efficiently get through great works of literature and approach what we're going to read next in a calculated way. But what I will say about Blood Meridian is that you will start to acquaint yourself with all of these great works that have come before it and influenced it subconsciously as you're going through the novel. There is this real sense of the depth and richness of meaning in this novel that is unparalleled even in a lot of Cormac McCarthy's other works. Of any novel written after World War II, I think Blood Meridian stands the greatest chance of being looked back at in a few hundred years as just a towering, classic, epic novel. I really do believe that it was the best novel written in the back half of the 20th century. In Blood Meridian, we have the kid, who is never named, and the kid is our main character, but also the narrative is driven forward by the character Judge Holden. So we have the kid and Judge Holden. Judge Holden is described in the novel as a 7-foot tall, extremely strong, pale, hairless individual. It's unclear at first whether he is fully human or not, and he certainly has sort of an immortal, timeless impact on the narrative. And a lot of what makes his character so spooky is the feeling that he may never die. And there are some parallels between this character, Judge Holden, who is hell-bent on violence. He tends to go after people who are less powerful than him in a purely evil and complete way. And compare the character of Judge Holden first to the character of Captain Ahab in Moby Dick. Ahab also is hell-bent on a violent mission, and that is to kill Moby Dick. But Captain Ahab does have more redeeming qualities to him, and he does, in some ways, seek to be part of the world. We're told in Moby Dick that Captain Ahab has started a family in his later years, and Judge Holden surely has never thought in any way about being that constructive a member of society. Judge Holden, who is described as a great white being, has a lot more in common with Moby Dick, who is a great pale albino whale. And the character of the kid, who is more or less our main character in Blood Meridian, though he will disappear on the page for long stretches of time and not be described at all. He's a lot more like Ishmael, the narrator of Moby Dick. The kid is both of the violence in Blood Meridian, but also, especially later in the novel, not to give too much away because I don't want to spoil much, he is able to, in some ways, sort of question what he's done in the past and rise in some ways above the violence morally. Blood Meridian is elegantly constructed to be morally ambiguous, especially at key moments. So Cormac McCarthy, through the narration, is not passing overt moral judgment over the actions of any of the characters. And in that way, it allows us to steep ourselves in this hyper-violent world and draw our own conclusions. You don't have to be a brilliant reader or an English scholar, an English major in college to get a lot out of this novel. So I definitely don't want you to feel like you have to be writing little essays in your head along the way, comparing Blood Meridian to other works. Think of it as a singular experience. You can go in knowing nothing about Cormac McCarthy and knowing very little about the real historical events that Blood Meridian is based on, and still have a complete and mesmerizing experience. I was turned off by the violence the first couple times I tried to read the novel, but once I kind of got over that, and really probably because I got taught how to read the novel by trying it a couple of different times, once I was able to get all the way through it, I was completely blown away. Let's talk a little bit about Shakespeare's influence on the novel as well. Judge Holden is a theatrical character. He's able to command crowds and command rooms really well. And in that way, his presence on the page really is reminiscent of an actor on a stage. And so you can read stretches of Blood Meridian in the same way that you would read one of Shakespeare's plays. For that matter, Shakespeare was a great influence on Moby Dick, to the extent that some of the chapters of Moby Dick are even styled as though they are plays, with a character's name, colon, and then the line that they're saying. Cormac McCarthy does not style his narrative in that same way, but the construction of his sentences, paragraphs, and chapters is spare stylistically. There are no quotation marks, and you are invited, through the form of Cormac McCarthy's writing, to think of it not just as prose fiction, but also to hear the meter in the writing. Often the sentences will have very poignant phrases and poignant phrase and poignant phrase, which reads almost like you're reading poetry. And then at other times, there will be conversations that are back and forth with nothing other than just the dialogue neatly arranged in descending order on the page, much like you would find the dialogue written in a play, in one of Shakespeare's plays. It's the swelling of this rich language and the way that Cormac McCarthy seamlessly blends different forms of fiction together that really gives this work its richness. And ultimately, it's the descriptions of the natural landscape that these killers are moving through, as well as at times the descriptions of violence, highly stylized descriptions of violence, aesthetically pleasing descriptions of violence. I don't even know if I like describing them as aesthetically pleasing, but aesthetically rich, let's say. It's this way that Cormac McCarthy is approaching the material that ultimately allows the work to rise above the brutality and horror and just evil nature of what is being described. And that's what makes the novel high art, as opposed to something a lot more pulpy or gratuitous. And I don't want to get into the epilogue of Blood Meridian, just like I wouldn't want to get into the epilogue of Moby Dick. But if you've read both of them, I'm sure you've considered the fact that both of them do have a short, one-page long epilogue that sort of informs, after you've read all of the material, how you might view everything you just read. The Blood Meridian epilogue is particularly opaque and difficult to understand the first time you've read it. So I would just encourage you to mull it over, reread it a few times, and then if you're still confused about it, just look up an interpretation of it. Harold Bloom in The Bright Book of Life offers a really good interpretation of the epilogue in Blood Meridian. I hope this gave you a great sense of how you might approach the material in Blood Meridian, how you might go about reading the novel, and also why it's important to read it. I do firmly believe that reading books, not just great renowned literature, but reading any novel or poem or work of literature that is crafted with care, I do believe that that is a very important thing for people to do. You're not doing nothing when you're reading a great work like Blood Meridian. It's time well spent, and I do hope that you pick up this novel. Thanks as always for watching. I'm William. I'm a writer. I will be making book-related content here indefinitely, and I hope to see you again in another video soon. Take care.